One of the things we need to pay attention to, not only as coaches, but just as good human beings, is having good communication. And if we want to improve our communication, one of the best things we can do is understand and leverage the role that context plays in good communication. I don't know if you've ever been in one of these conversations or not when somebody does a little name drop. Now, I don't mean they drop the name of a famous person. You know, Billy Graham told me not to name drop. I mean, they just drop the name Jennifer into the conversation. And you don't know the person you're talking to well enough to know who's Jennifer. Is Jennifer this person's spouse? Is it their sister, their mother, their coworker, their boss? Are we talking about Jennifer Aniston, Jennifer Lopez? Who's Jennifer? And what this person has done is they have not given you any context. They've assumed you know. That is terrible communication. And we do it all the time. Just a few weeks ago, I received an email from, it seemed like kind of a familiar name, but the person simply said, "Hey, I need to meet. When's a good time?" And again, unless you're a family member or one of my best friends, I need a little context. Who are you? Why do you want to meet? You know, these kinds of things. Only later did I learn that the person is someone I go to church with, and they wanted to meet to learn more about whether the Sunday school class I teach is a good fit for them. I had no context, so I had ignored the email. I appreciated how brief it was, but it needed to be a little longer and give some context. When we don't give enough context, people get lost in the conversation. People aren't connecting the dots that we maybe are connecting. And not only they get lost, but oftentimes they'll get confused. They'll get maybe even frustrated. I remember I had a client or a colleague years ago when I worked in the technology sector, and he would come into team meetings and he would hand out spreadsheets, like 10 pages stapled together. This was before we were paperless. And he would say, "Okay, hey, let's go ahead and turn to page 3 and look at column 4, row 7. And he would just dive right into the details of this spreadsheet. And nobody else around the table even knew what the spreadsheet was about, let alone did we know what problem we were trying to solve or what are we even talking about here? And so what he was doing is the thing that really trips a lot of people up in their communication. He was assuming that everybody else knew what he knew. Everybody else was on the same page. He had already processed this. He had gotten to a certain point where he was ready to talk about, this piece of data. Nobody else was with him. We got to bring people with us for good communication. So let's quickly mention 3 ways you can improve the role of context in your communication. The first thing is you got to have a dose of empathy. You have to be able to put yourself in the other person's shoes and see things from their perspective and kind of appreciate their level of knowledge and ignorance. By the way, ignorance is not a criticism, it's a description. We're all ignorant on many things, most things. And so you have to have empathy for the person you're communicating with, that they don't see everything you see and they don't see everything the way you see it. I have a colleague who often will just sort of put dots of information into a conversation, and in his mind, those dots connect. And yet, as the recipient of the conversation, I'm thinking, what do these things have to do with each other? And as he's improved his communication, he's taken a dose of empathy and he's realized, I have to connect the dots for the people that I'm talking with. I can't just describe the dots, so to speak. So take some empathy, have a dose of empathy. Another thing you can do to improve context in your communication, give your communication some chapter titles. Think about newspaper headlines or the title of a chapter in a nonfiction book. I mean, I guess in a fiction book, the chapter title can kind of be evocative or mysterious, but in a nonfiction book, you want it to be descriptive. And so when you're communicating, it's often very helpful to start with the headline, to start with a descriptive chapter title for what we are about to talk about. I often encourage my coaching clients to do this. They'll come into a coaching conversation and they'll just dive right into describing the issue. And sometimes I'll say, "Hey, hold on, give a little bit of context." And that's not just so I can catch up with where they are. It's also to help them frame it, about what's really going on. And so I'm not necessarily looking for backstory. I'm not looking for history. I'm not looking for a lot of details. I'm just looking for the context. Is it a problem at work? Is this a challenge in my marriage? Is it, trouble with a kid? Whatever it is. What's sort of the headline? Then let's go into the details. A third thing you can do to improve context in your conversations, and this one is more about when you're on the receiving end of poor context, is you can stop pretending. So if you are in a communication with somebody else and they don't give context when context is needed, stop pretending like you know what they're talking about. You don't. You need context. Stop the conversation. Politely ask them to give a little bit more context so that you can follow with them more effectively, more efficiently. In my experience, the world is filled with poor communicators. I don't know how our species has gotten this far. But if you want to contribute to our species flourishing, you're going to contribute to better communication by improving context. This is true in your coaching conversations or just any of your conversations. Give context, then give the content, and expect the same thing from the people that you're in conversations with. So hopefully that's helpful for you to improve your communication.
Be sure and subscribe so you don't miss any of our great content.